Okay, good morning everyone, and it's nice to see you all after we've had a bit of a gap as we finished off the old sugya and started a new sugya. So the new sugya we're going to learn is, even though it's entitled in the Gemara, Losh and Ofeh, what we're going to learn is really just the melacha of Ofeh, the melacha of cooking and baking bishul and Ofeh on Shabbos. Now, the melacha of Ofeh, of cooking and baking, is a massive one. It's probably one of the largest melachas in Shas. It has enormous ramifications in practical halacha in terms of so much of what we do in the kitchen. It has complications, terms that we've heard around that need clarification. Yad soledes, the minimum temperature that bishul occurs, kli rishon, kli sheni, and hatzmana, and come on, leave things on the stove, and belechs, and everything else. We're not going to be able to cover all of that in this shiur, because this is a sugya which is scattered all over Shas, all over Masechet Shabbat and elsewhere, Beitzah and elsewhere, that deals with the halachas of cooking on Shabbos. So our goal is going to be more modest, which is to try and dip our toes into one aspect of bishul, and just understand our topic, our sugya. So the Gemara starts off the Ofeh, dealing with the term used in the Mishnah of Ofeh, which is baking, and the Gemara asks why it calls it Ofeh rather than bishul. This is Omra Papa. Shovak Tana didon bishul, samamonim dava b'mishkan v'nakot Ofeh. Why did our Tana desert bishul, which took place in the Mishkan in the context of boiling of herbs and spices, or samamonim? It's actually in the context of dyeing, boiling of the herbs which are used in the dyeing process, because the Mishkan used to have a dyeing process that was used. And why did it leave that and instead talk about Ofeh, which is baking, which is applicable to bread? And the answer the Gemara gives is Tana didon siddur de pas noket. Our Tana speaks about the siddur of pas, the bread making, the put making process, as opposed to that which took place in the Mishkan, which was the dyeing process. Now, I'm not going to go into this again in detail, but there's two ways of viewing the melachos of Mishkan. One can look at them top down, if you like. Sorry, the melachos of Shabbos. One can look at them top down as derived from the processes that took place in the Mishkan, which is the source of the melachos. Or one can look at them bottom up, from the human side of things, what we see as important creative works. And one of the tensions, as one learns through the whole of Masechet Shabbat, through all the melachos, is between these two ways of looking at it. Is this about Mishkan-driven melachos, or is this about human-driven melachos? And our Mishnah, says Rav Papa, lists them in the human needs, in which afiyah of pas is the important human achievement, as opposed to the boiling of dyes, which was what was going on in the Mishkan. Now, I put in the sheet what Rashi says on the Mishnah in Ein Gimel Amud Aleph, which is where the melachos are listed. And Rashi explains this question to us by saying that the derivation of the melachos is from the asiyas hamishkan, from the making of the Mishkan. These are Rashi's words on the Mishnah. Rashi says, Ofeh lo yav Mishkan. Baking didn't take place in the Mishkan because baking only took place with pas, and pas lo shaychim b'mlechas hamishkan. So Rashi understands that the source of the melachos are the works that was done in the building of the Mishkan. Now, the link between Shabbos and the Mishkan is not Rashi, it's a Gemara. The Gemara says very clearly that we learn the melachos from the Mishkan. However, there is a very significant machlokas rishonim about what that means that we learn the melachos from the Mishkan. Rashi and most of the rishonim learn that it means the melachos of the construction of the Mishkan. The minority opinion is the view of Rav Hai Gaon, and Rav Hai Gaon says we learn it from the functioning of the Mishkan, not from the construction of the Mishkan. Now, I'm not going to go into all the ramifications of this, but this is how Rav Hai Gaon learns it. One of the early Gaonim, one of the late Gaonim, but from the earlier era to the Rishonim, Rav Hai Gaon not that many generations as it happens before Rashi, because he's from the later Gaonim and Rashi's from the earlier Rishonim. But nonetheless, this is the view of Rav Hai Gaon, but most of the Rishonim learn it's the construction of Mishkan. If it is the working of the Mishkan, there's a number of questions on Rav Hai Gaon. There's lots of Gemaras which don't seem to fit this. And our Gemara is one of them, because our Gemara says that in the Mishkan, Bishul took place, not Ofeh. Boiling took place of the Samamonim, as opposed to baking of bread. Now, if it's the construction of the Mishkan, that's perfectly true. However, if it's the running of the Mishkan, this is incorrect, because in the Mishkan, of course, bread was baked, and I'm talking here about the Lechem Haponim, and the weekly showbread, the bread that was placed in the Shulchan, and the Shtei HaLechem, which was sacrificed on Shavuos, and these were baked. So this is a little bit of a question on Rav Hai Gaon, if one learns that this is the running of the Mishkan as opposed to the creation of the Mishkan. I did see in one of the Achronim a clever answer to this question, which is that the editor of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, and Rabbi Yehuda Nossi is of the opinion that baking of bread supersedes Shabbos. Now, the whole logic of Rav Hai Gaon is that things that you are doing in the running of the Mishkan, that's his view, the running of the Mishkan, don't supersede Shabbos, the things that don't supersede Shabbos. However, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi is of the view, and I quoted this, I put this in the source sheets, the Gemara in Menachos, I'm based on base. He is of the view that the baking of the Shtei HaLechem and the Lechem Haponim supersedes Shabbos. In which case, this wouldn't be a good source for the Melacha, and therefore even Rav Hai Gaon would have to acknowledge that the source of the Melacha is in the making of the Mishkan, not the processing of not the running of the Mishkan. So in brief, I'm aware that this is a little bit off topic in a sense, but just to file that away as information, Rashi learns the manufacturing of the Mishkan is the source. Rav Hai Gaon learns it's the running of the Mishkan, things that couldn't be done in the Mishkan because of Shabbos, and therefore it can only be learned from things that could not be done in the Mishkan because of Shabbos. But the baking of bread could be done in the Mishkan on Shabbos, and therefore can't be the source, and therefore you wouldn't have a problem with this Gemara, because at least Rabbi Huda's view is that baking of bread supersedes Shabbos. Others disagree, but Rabbi Huda is the editor of the Mishnayos, and therefore the Gemara is asking, according to you, Rabbi Huda, who learns that the baking of bread does supersede Shabbos, then the only example of a malacha that does not supersede Shabbos was in the making of the Mishkan, which is Bishul, not Ofeh, and that's the pshat in the Gemara's.
You've still got melachot, haven't you, Rabbi Zobin? Offerings of melachot you had to bring, people brought.
The melachos were generally fried, not baked. Never it's tigun.
All of them? I'm sure there was some which were baked. There was machat and machavet or something like that, I remember.
I think these are all in pans, but I'll double check afterwards.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong.
Okay. And again, I'm not sure. We'll have to check which with the melachos that are brought on Shabbos and Yom Tov, whether they were how they were used.
Okay.
Also, so I don't know. It needs to be checked. Okay, so this is as far as I know, there isn't a question because these melachos are fried, not baked. But I'll double check the Shabbos and Yom Tov. Okay, so this is the start of the sugya. The next thing I want to look at is our classic formula that we always look at when we start a new melacha, which is what is the relationship between these melachas. Ofeh and Mevashel, how do they link to each other? Is one an Av and one a Toldo, or are they both Avos, or what's their link to each other? And yet again, we meet the very standard machlokas that we've met before. The Rambam in Perek Tes Halacha Aleph learns that these are co-Avos. These are both Avos. Ofeh and Mevashel are both Avos, and this is the general principle of the Rambam, who accepts the concept of co-Avos, and says that there can be several malachas who share the status of being Avos because they're all so similar to each other that they are achieving, he uses the language of inyan echad, one goal, one sort of engagement with a production, and therefore they all count as co-Avos. I just remind you, because we've seen this in previous sugyas, we saw the Rambam with, for example, Notea and Zoreah. This is another good example of this concept. Planting a tree in the ground, a sapling in the ground, and sowing the seed of a plant in the ground. One is Zoreah, one is Notea. We looked at this on the sugya of Ein Gimel on the base, and we saw there again the view of the Rambam that these are both co-Avos melachas because they are one inyan. And we saw that the Rambam translates the Mefarshim and the Rambam asked what this means that they are one. In what way then do we have 39 melachas? We have many more than 39 melachas because Zoreah and Notea are both Avos, Ofeh and Mevashel are both Avos. And the Mevashel answered that the Rambam learns that when we list 39 Avos Melachos, we mean 39 inyonim, 39 ways or styles of engagement, but in those themselves could be many co-Avos, and therefore the relationship between Ofeh and Mevashel is not that of Av and Tolda, but is that of co-Avos. There is an alternative view over here, which is the view of the Rabbeinu Chananel, and I printed the Rabbeinu Chananel again in the source sheets, and he says, Omar Papa Shavik Bishal Samonim, he says that Afia told us Bishalhu, that Afia is a tolda of Bishal, and this again brings us back to the generic argument that we've seen many, many times on Ein Gimel Amud Beis, as to whether this view of the Rambam is correct or not, whether it's possible to have co-others or the relationship is always told us. And if you remember there, Rabbeinu Chananel learned that with Notea and Zereah, it was also a relationship of Tolda and Av, as opposed to co-others. So this is Rabbeinu Chananel, the Shitosoi. The Shitosoi means consistent with his view previously. One sees a sort of parallel thread of thinking running through the Rambam and Rabbeinu Chananel. I'll just point out, incidentally, that Rabbeinu Chananel quotes this from the Yerushalmi, and it also appears that he had an alternative Gersa in our Gemara, because our Gemara answers that our Tana is listing Sidura de Pas, the list of bread making, as opposed to the Mishkan work, which was dying. He brings this answer in the name of the Yerushalmi. It would appear that Rabbeinu Chananel did not have that in the Bavli. So Rabbeinu Chananel has a different Gersa. In our version, a Papa asks a question, and either a Pop himself or an anonymous editor answers the question by saying that the Mishnah is listing Sidura de Pas, whereas in the Rabbeinu Chananel's Gersa, it would appear our Gemara leaves the question unresolved, and the Yerushalmi answers the question. Either way, this is the classic machlokus that we've seen. I also want to remind you of one other point, which is this concept of Avos and Toldas, this relationship, this idea of an Av and a Tolda, and this idea of an Inyan, that several things can be included in the Melacha, only applies in Hilchos Shabbos. And the reason is because Hilchos Shabbos is not about actions, it's about what I call hisaskut, engagement, involvement with creative activity. It's not about a specific deed. So, for example, we looked at numerous examples when the Torah talks about in other areas of halacha specific actions, whether it's geziza, shearing, or other such things. It means it literally as that specific action, and we wouldn't extend it. It's only Shabbos, which is about engagement with things, where we will extend to include a broader category. The pasuk, after all, doesn't say don't bake on Shabbos. It's the Lusasa called melacha. The prohibition is a melacha. Melacha means an achievement, engagement with achieving a particular aim, and out of that arises a whole load of halachas. So just to give one example of this, in Bishul Basa B'cholov, so the pasuk says, Mevashel gedi b'chalev yomoi, don't cook a animal in its mother's milk. We extend this to Torah Sheba'al Peh, which I'm not going to go into, to any milk and meat. However, we don't extend it to frying and baking midoraisa, at least according to many of the poskim. And the reason we don't extend it is, even though when it comes to melachot Shabbos, tigun and tzliah, frying and roasting, and zafiyah, baking, which is what our sugya talks about, are all co-overs. However, when it comes to bishul, basa b'cholov, the cooking of milk and meat, no, we don't extend it because the Torah says bishul, and there's no reason to extend it to anything beyond a bishul min ha-Torah. So just as a general idea, we saw, I think, at the beginning of Ein Gimel on the base, we looked at Moed Cotton, we looked at Reishis Hageiz, we looked at a whole string of halachas where the Torah talks about specific actions where we don't extend them, as opposed to Shabbos where it's about melacha, and therefore we do extend it. I saw someone texted me off group, how does Rabbeinu Chananel understand the Mishnah, which says Ofeh is baking? The answer is he understands that he understands this is what the question of the Gemara is, the Yerushalmi is, and this is the answer of the Yerushalmi, that the Mishnah, when it lists the Avos Melachas, is not listing all the Avos Melachas, it's listing examples of these 39 categories, including some examples which are told us not Avos. So in Rabbeinu Chananel's view, the question of the Gemara is much more powerful, because not only is it not listing a co-Av, it's listing a tolda, and nonetheless it chooses to list it because it's a better example for us. The Mishnah is there coming to list practical examples of how we do melachos, and therefore it lists the Dura de Pas as opposed to Bishul in the Torah. So this is the next point that I wanted to make in the Gemara. Our standard formulation, the relationship between Ofeh and Mevashel, according to the Rambam, co-melachos, according to the Rabbeinu Chananel and perhaps others, Av and Tolda, like we saw with Zoreh and Notea, and Choresh and Chofa. We saw it so many times in Ein Gimel Amud base. We now get to the next. I'll stop there. Any questions about this before we just move on to the next little sub-sugya in our learning?
I think we were unclear about what the melachot was actually teaching us in the end. I think we couldn't quite follow that through. Yeah,
sorry. Okay, so I printed the source of melachos simply to show that baking does take place in the Mishkan in the context of shtei alechem and lechem aponim. And therefore, what does the Gemara mean when it says it doesn't take place in the Mishkan? And the answer is, according to Rashi, it doesn't take place in the construction of the Mishkan, though it does take place in the running of the Mishkan or the Mikdash. And according to Rav Haigon, who learns that melachos are defined by the running of the Mishkan, we have a difficulty from that Gemara because surely baking does take place. And the answer would be it does, but actually in that case, the obligation to bake overwhelms Shabbos, and therefore that can't be the example of what the Torah is talking about of where baking is prohibited on Shabbos. So Rashi would read the Gemara as Ofeh doesn't take place in the Mishkan at all, because it's the construction of Ofeh. Rav Haigon would read the Mishnah as Ofeh doesn't take place in a manner in which it supersedes Shabbos. Shabbos supersedes it, because its true baking takes place in the Mishkan, but in a permitted manner, not in a forbidden manner.
According to Rav Haigon, though, so then we've got problems with Katsira as well. I mean, we learn the Gemara learns there that Katsira is also Docha Shabbos. That's the whole point of that Gemara.
That's correct. And the same thing then you would say, that the Katsira, which is not Docha Shabbos, is the Katsira used for preparatory work. For example, the spices, or for example, the dyes that were made, or for example, Katsira for the flour used in the Mincha offering, as opposed to the Katsira of the Omer, which would be Docha Shabbos. So a parallel discussion.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so this is how Rav Haigon would learn. As I said, Rav Haigon is a little known opinion. The easier resolution to all these issues, because there's many Gemaras that are problematic according to Rav Hai, is to adopt the position of Rashi, which is that it's not the running of the Mishkan that other melachos were interested in, it's the construction of the Mishkan, and that resolves all these problems. So Rav Haigon ended up being a minority view, because he had to give lots of different answers in each occasion. Okay, the Gemara then carries on, and it says, Omer of Acha bar of Avira, Haiman de Shoda Sichsa La'atuna. So a Sichsa La'atuna means a peg of some sort, which was thrown. I don't know why it was thrown, but it used to get thrown into a atuna, into a stove. And the Gemara says, Haiman de Shoda Sichsa La'atuna, Chayev Mishum Mevashel. It's Chayev because of Mevashel. Ask the Gemara Pshita. This is obvious. His intention is to strengthen it, in other words, to harden it, and therefore one should be potter. And the Kamashman, the reason why one is chayev, is the mirpa rofa v'hoda komet. It first of all softens it, and then it hardens it. So I hope by now, having seen the Mara Makomas, you will have seen that there's an extensive machlokus about how to learn this, and it's a little confusing, because there's a machlokus in Halacha about how to learn the Gemara, what the concept of the Gemara is, and there's a machlokus in the practicalities of what exactly is this peg that's being thrown into the stove. What is the nature of this peg? What exactly is it made from? What's going on over here? So, first of all, conceptually, what is the question, and what is the havamin, and what is the maskana? What's the question and what's the answer? I would have thought you're potter because you're hardening it, and that's your intention. So that's clear. Why are you throwing it into the fire? Because you want to harden it. You want a strong peg. And therefore, you would have thought there's no bishul over here. Kamash malon, that there is a bishul because it first gets softened. So what exactly is that havon or askana? Why would I have thought you're exempt from bishul? And why is it, and what's the answer to the question of why you are chayav for bishul? So that's the conceptual question of the Gemara, the halachic question of the Gemara. What's the havamina, or what's the maskana? And then there's a practical question on the Gemara, which is what exactly is this case over here what's the example the Gemara is giving, and the two are linked but not identical. There's a machlokes in the practicalities and a machlokes in the lomdus. So I just want to work through both of them. And for various technical reasons, I've chosen in this case to go in the reverse order. Normally one ought to work out the reality of the Gemara, what's the practicality of what the Gemara is saying, and then understand the lomdus. In this case, I'm going to go up from the lomdus and then only then speak about the practicalities, because I just think it's a little clearer to explain.
May I ask, why does Bishul have to be softening something? Because there are things that you might bake which I would have thought only get hardened.
Okay, so as usual, Gary, you've got to the crux of the matter, and you're absolutely right. And I was going to come on to this later. But you're not. Please don't. Absolutely a correct question to ask. I was going to, in presenting this issue, assume the premise of the Gemara that Bishul is about softening things, not hardening things. But that premise is itself very difficult and very problematic. I was going to assume it because intuitively that's what we think of as most Bishul. You take a hard potato and you boil it and it softens it. After all, that's why we are Mevashel. However, there are counter examples. So, for example, an egg you boil and it hardens. Ofeh, which is the very subject we're talking about here, baking, you take a soft dough and you bake it and it hardens. But I'm going to put this question on hold, and for now I'm going to go with what seems to be Rashi's assumption, that Bishul is about softening things, and we'll need to unpick this. It's going to be very problematic. Okay, so how do we learn the sugya? So just working through the sources first. The first thing is I want to work through the sources, what Maramakomis do we have in it, then try and work through the concepts, and then try and work through what actually the case study of the Gemara is. So Rashi says, seems to imply that the melacha is the softening of the peg. And therefore we understand the flow of the Gemara. The Gemara thought that Bishul is not relevant here because the peg is hardened. That's why you're throwing it into the oven to toughen the wood and to make it hard. And Kamash Malon, that, no, since it goes through a softening process first, therefore you are chayiv. I don't know exactly the metzias of how it goes through a softening process. I've never baked wood, but it sounds like there's liquid in the wood, and when you first heat it up, the liquid flows a bit and becomes hot, and therefore the wood becomes softer and damper because it draws out the liquid from the pores. And then as you carry on the baking process, the liquid dries up, and as Rashi says, it's comet, it sort of shrivels in on itself, and the wood becomes very, very hard through the process. And I found this is explicit in the Meiri. The Meiri seems to explain the process like that. He says, Metoch, I printed the Meiri in the source, Metoch lachos hamayim shebesochim, because of the moisture of the water inside it, misrapet chila, it originally suffers till the hamayim kolim misyavish, till the water is finished off and dries out, and then it becomes hardened. And the melacha, crucially, the Meiri says this explicitly, therefore the answer to the Gemara is that the melacha is the ripoi that takes place in the mid-stage. Now, in Lomdus, this is understandable. In physics, in the biology of it, this is understandable. You bake the wood, I assume the metzias is like this, that it becomes softer as the lachos, as the liquid, the moisture is drawn out, and then becomes harder as the water is evaporated off and it shrivels in on itself and becomes hard. There is a problem over here because Rav Avira says, Haiman de Shad Sichsel Atana Chayev Mishum Mevashel. He's Chayev because of Mevashel. Now, according to Rashi's explanation, this is a temporary melacha. And generally speaking, a melacha that you only do with temporary intention is not a melacha midaraisa. A melacha means a significant change, and therefore we would assume it has to be a permanent stage as opposed to or semi-permanent as opposed to something that's temporary. Now this can be for one of two reasons normally temporary is defined. Either objectively, it's something which won't last long, or subjectively that I only intend for it to last a short amount of time. Over here, I guess objectively it is a permanent change, meaning if I would take it out of the stove at that point there, it would remain soft for at least a significant amount of time. Whereas subjectively, my intention is to let all the water evaporate and for it to harden. So this is a question, Rashi, and the answer to Rashi might be that Rashi considers this a permanent change because I'm softening it as a vital and necessary step to the production process, which is then to harden it and make it a strong peg. And therefore Rashi views this as a significant step, even though it will only stay soft for a short amount of time, because the foundation that the softness gives it is permanent as a part of the production of it becoming hardened. And therefore this would be enough to make it a melacha melachot min Torah. We saw, by the way, this concept a little bit in Boreh on Ein Daled Omud Aleph. So I'm not going to go through it again, but probably this is a good answer to Rashi. So this is one way of reading the sugya. There's a fascinating second way of reading the sugya, which also comes from Rashi. And here I want to give a little historic background, which is, well, possibly comes from Rashi, which is that we have two Rashis printed in our Talmud Bavlis. We have Rashi on the Gemara and we have Rashi on the Rif. Now the background to this is that the Rif in faraway North Africa wrote the first, or one of the first halachic works. And he didn't restructure it. We're used to halachic works not being structured in the order of the Gemara, like the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, but the Rif structured his halachic work in the order of the Gemara, and basically it was all sorts of a cut and paste style of production. He took out all the shaktavatari, all the backwards and forwards in the Gemara. He took out all the opinions which are shaloka halacha, which we don't paskin like, and he basically cut and pasted the conclusion of the Gemara, the bottom halachic line, and added in here and there a few words of commentary. Rif, very, very important halachic work, very important source of understanding the Gemara. North Africa, dating back to the earliest generation of the Rishonim. Now, the reason this style of halachic pasak fell out of favor is because it's less user-friendly, because Gemara, things are scattered all over the place. So if you want a practical halachic work designed for someone who doesn't know the whole of Shas, it's more useful to have it structured like the Shulchan Aruch or the Rambam, where all the halachas of Shabbos are gathered together. Whereas if you want to learn Bishul as a melachot, for example, so we've got a few lines here, and then we'll have a few lines in Beit, so the Rif wrote his halachic work in the sequence. The Gemara is less user-friendly, but the Rif became very popular in the 1300s in Germany. And as a result, people began learning the Rif in order as if it was almost the Gemara itself. And some anonymous figure in that era took and cut and pasted Rashi to produce a commentary on the Rif, a pseudo-Rashi, as it were, taking the words of Rashi and where relevant writing on the side of the Rif. And we still have this commentary to this day, and therefore when you open a page of Rif, it looks like a page of Gemara. On one side it has Rashi, and on the other side it has more extensive mini essay notes on the Rif, which is somewhat parallel to Tosfos from other Rishonim on different Masechtas, and some Masechtas it's Rabbi Yonah, it's Rabbi Nissim, other Rishonim which wrote on the other side. So the Rif now looks like a page of Gemara. Now the Rashi Perush on the Rif was not written by Rashi itself, it was cut and pasted from Rashi. And we know that it was done, as I said, in 1300s Germany, partly because the Lars, the foreign tongue translations which Rashi puts in his commentary, Rashi wrote in Old French, and the anonymous editor who cut and pasted Rashi onto the Rif put in Old German. Now, why do I say all of this? Because very occasionally you will find in the Rashi on the Rif a different explanation to what Rashi himself says. And there's one of two possibilities as to why this happened. Either the anonymous editor chose to change Rashi and give a different Peshat, in which case this Rashi, pseudo-Rashi as it were, is evidence of another Peshat floating around the yeshivas in Germany in the 1300s, or he was using a different manuscript of Rashi. So knowing Rashi on the Rif is a very important source for either how the yeshiva world was learning the Gemara in the 1300s, or perhaps for another variant of Rashi. And fascinatingly, in our Rashi on the Rif, on our Sugya, Rashi says something different to what Rashi on the Gemara, to what the real Rashi says. So we have Rashi on the Rif saying something different to what real Rashi says, and I printed it in the source. I've run out of time, so I will leave that for you as preparation work, if you haven't done so already, to have a look at Rashi on the Rif, and see what Rashi on the Rif says, how he learns differently to Rashi in front of us. And next week, on Tuesday, we'll start off in Mitzvah Hashem with the view of Rashi, and I'm going to treat that Rashi as a second Rishon. So we're going to have a machlokas, three sources in Rishonim about how to learn the Sugya, and I'm going to, chapter number 1 is going to be our Rashi, view number 2 is going to be Rashi and the Rif, and view number 3 will be the Rambam, which we'll in Mitzvah Hashem look at next Tuesday.